couple things I wanted to start with I want to make sure everybody understands that the discussion we want to have tonight is not going to having to do with what we refer to as the sticks and bricks. So we're not going to talk about electrical permits. We're not talking about plumbing permits. We're not talking about structural design, that type of thing. We're not talking about getting a building permit for the sticks and bricks, but we are going to talk about everything else. Let's put it that way. All the things that would have to do with the subdivision, soil erosion control plans, stormwater management plans that we might get into when we're going to add on to something or demolish something. But if we were talking before we got started, where you have a property that's like a total gut, that's not the kind of permits that I want to talk about tonight. But also part of the discussion tonight I wanted to have was on things that people should be doing prior to buying a property. Again, like we were just talking about all the dumb things that we have buyers out there doing, and obviously an investor buyer is probably more savvy than maybe let's just call it a non-investor buyer. But then we also have, because I deal with them all the time too, those people who think that it's easy to be an investor buyer, and they're going to get themselves in trouble because it's, as you know, it's not always all that easy to be a investor buyer. But I wanted to talk about flood elevation certificates and flood insurance. I don't know how often that comes into play in with respect to buying and or if you're selling something. I want to talk about subdivision possibilities, and subdivision is a broad term in Pennsylvania in that it also entails land development, because there may be an existing structure on a property that can be redeveloped in some way, whether that be some sort of multi-residential, or it could be even some sort of commercial or maybe industrial, but I don't think anybody's going to get into that per se in here. But you're going to get into subdivision land development, whether you're subdividing it to make more lots to build more single-family dwellings or more townhouses or more something residential, or it could be land development where we're taking an existing structure and we're going to increase its use. I wanted to touch base on connections to public sewer systems versus also on-site sewage disposal. I mean, if you're in your more urbanized areas, you're obviously going to have public sewer, and but you may find some properties that are on the fringes of that public sewer system, which are still on-site sewage, and there may be some economies of scale be had through purchasing those, getting them connected to public sewer system relatively inexpensively anymore. And I tell clients all day long that two identical properties, one of which is connected to a public sewer system versus one that is got an on-site septic system, the one that's connected to the sewer system is worth a premium over the other. And then I just want to touch base on some of the things you have to get into if you're going to take and renovate a property beyond the bounds of what is there now. You're going to put some sort of addition on it. You're going to tear something down and rebuild it. And what are the thresholds that we need to have in the back of our minds, where some sort of permitting, such as stormwater management permitting, soil erosion control permitting, those types of permits might come into play. Let's start with floodplain. As anybody is a buyer and potentially a seller, you need to be cognizant of any floodplain. And excuse me, even in the city, as you know, there's a lot of parts of the city that sit within the 100-year floodplain. And those properties may or may not require flood insurance. And the only way to know if they're going to require flood insurance, and if so, what is the true dollar cost of that flood insurance going to be, is to have what's called a flood elevation certificate prepared, which is it's a FEMA document that has to be prepared by a licensed surveyor or engineer in the jurisdiction, obviously in this case the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, in order to determine, as I tell everybody, how wet your feet are going to get in that flooding event. And a couple things to realize, that there are two kinds of flood zones that are of concern. We have a zone A and a zone AE, and they can be gotten by going to FEMA.gov, click on what's called FIRM, which is an acronym for Flood Insurance Rate Map, FIRM, Flood Insurance Rate Map, and putting the address in. and it'll pop up and show you the property, and it'll show you whether or not it's in any identified floodplain, and if it is in a zone A or zone AE. The reason I say that is that in a zone AE, FEMA has already calculated the base flood elevation for that area, and so they know how deep the water is going to be during the flooding event. In the zone A, they have not calculated that yet. And in today's reality, it takes us between 3 and 4 months to be able to complete a flood elevation certificate in a zone A, because we have to do a certain amount of surveying, transmit that data to FEMA in Virginia. They in turn calculate that base flood elevation, and then we can then complete the form. That becomes very tricky on settlements, because if you have someone who's buying a property that's in a floodplain and we don't have the flood elevation certificate to know how deep the flood waters are going to be, they could get dinged pretty bad on their flood insurance. And the flood insurance sometimes will blow up the deal because it becomes so expensive that you get these people that are in there, they're financing at FHA, VA, or USDA, for instance, where they don't have a lot of money to put down, and they're using a lot of their available funds to buy it from you, that they then get dinged because the flood insurance is too expensive. So you want to be thinking about that going in as the buyer, especially if it's going to be an investment property that you're going to flip, because you want ultimately, as you're renovating the property, you also want to be working on, for instance, the flood elevation certificate. The other thing to keep in mind is that there is a little quirk in the regulations that say that, let me back up and say, there's 2 kinds of flood insurance. There's private flood insurance, and there's insurance that you get through FEMA. The private flood insurance is typically far cheaper than the insurance you're going to get through FEMA. You can call up your insurance agent, you can call your nationwide agent and say, listen, I need flood insurance for this, and they probably have an insurance company that will insure that. If the property is being financed through FHA, VA, or USDA, so it's a government-backed mortgage, you must get the flood insurance from FEMA. You cannot go onto the private market. And again, the flood insurance that comes from FEMA is typically several times more expensive than it is coming from the private insurance market. So going into a deal, if you think it's in the floodplain, go to FEMA.gov, click on the firm tab, put the address in, and look at it to see. And if it is in the floodplain, ask a seller whether or not they have a recent flood elevation certificate, so you can actually get a real price on the flood insurance. If they don't have a recent certificate, or they don't have one at all, at that point, then you want to contact someone like ourselves to actually do the work necessary to produce that flood elevation certificate. And again, just be cognizant of the times, because if you're trying to get in and out of something, you want to make sure that you have that available then for the seller if you're in a flip kind of situation. It also could come into play with getting your building permits to do your sticks and bricks renovations, in that the underlying municipality, whether that be the city of Reading or somewhere else, they may have some special regulations that you're going to have to adhere to through the renovation process if the property is identified as being in a floodplain.
How much is the difference between the insurance through FEMA and the other one privately?
I can't necessarily answer that question other than to tell you from a personal experience. I own a property that is in a floodplain, and I had gotten the seller provided to me, because what I said to the seller had to, when I bought it, the seller had to provide me with the flood elevation certificate. They really didn't do that until just before settlement. But what they did provide me was their flood insurance bill from FEMA. It was $6,500 a year is what the seller was paying to FEMA. I got the flood insurance when I got it for $1,100 a year, and I got it privately, same insurance. Now, the I mean, and then I will tell you, then when we did the flood elevation certificate, I asked them that they had to pay for it. They finally got it to me just before settlement, and it actually indicated that the house was not in the floodplain. So for all those years, that seller was paying flood insurance. Now, granted, he wasn't paying $6,500 every year. It just goes up every year, but that was 2018. So he got the 2019 bills when he handed it to me, because it was in November of 18, and it was $6,500. But it was substantially more. So in that case, I paid 17%, 18% on the dollar for what it was that he was paying. Beyond that, I can't tell you. That would be a conversation that I would tell you that you should have with an insurance agent. Maybe there's some insurance agents in the group that you could reach out to and have that conversation. But I have been told that the private insurance is substantially less than the government insurance in cost. Same insurance.
And even in those examples you gave, that's pretty significant difference.
It's massive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. It's massive.
Mm-hmm.
Do your homework. Like anything, do your homework. And the other thing, the other takeaway there was, from my standpoint, it wasn't in the floodplain. I had put two things in my agreement of sale. I put in there that if it was going to cost me more than $4,000 a year, I had the right to walk. Didn't say I was going to walk. I just had the right to walk. I reserved the right to walk. And then I put in there that they had to provide me with the flood elevation certificate. And I think what they did is they kept holding out because they knew it was $6,500, and they were worried that I was going to walk because it was more than $4,000. I had already secured my own because the mortgage company required me to do it. And then it was like 3 days before settlement, they finally gave me the flood elevation certificate that showed that it was not in the floodplain. And then I went back and got my money back on my insurance, because there never was a potential for a loss to be insured. The next thing I want to touch base on was subdivision land development, because this comes up a lot with investors that I deal with. In fact, I got one today to look at, and we'll look at tomorrow for a client. So there's a lot of parcels out there that may have an existing, let's say, has an existing single-family dwelling on it, which may be subdividable. And if you can pick up that property at the right price and then go through the subdivision process, now you can sell, flip back out the single-family dwelling, and you can then build a house on the lot, or just flip the lot out as a separate entity. The takeaway there is going to be, realize that the subdivision land development process is probably going to take something upwards, for a simple one, I don't know, 9 months, 10 months. Would you say that's about right, Jason? To do a simple subdivision. So you have to take and factor that into your pro forma, because you're not going to be able to flip the house back out until that subdivision is done. But you can realize on top of what you're doing on the flipping side, that additional income. I find that today people don't want what I refer to as the back 40. So if I have a 3-acre parcel and the zoning allows me to subdivide a lot off of it, so now let's just say I wind up with a 1.5-acre lot with the house on it and a 1.5-acre building lot, the value of that house and the 1.5 acres is no different than the house with the 3 acres. You're not, in my opinion, you typically don't suffer any loss of value on the house by removing that building lot, but you have gained the value of that new building lot, which, depending on location, on the low side is probably between $40,000 and $50,000 today. On the high side could be pushing easily 6 digits, depending upon the location of that. So when you're looking at a potential property to buy and flip, or maybe to buy and hold, but I'm thinking, more along the flip, that you have to understand that there may be an intrinsic value in being able to subdivide that property. And we, all day long, if you call us and give me an address, all I need is an address, I can look at that property very quickly and tell you whether or not we think it can be subdivided. Is it worth subdividing? Meaning that, what's it going to cost to subdivide it? And it depends on the municipality. We have some municipalities that we deal with that are extremely communistic, and then there's others that are not. And if it's an extremely communistic municipality, you may just want to pass on it. It's just not worth it. But we can quickly determine whether or not it's something that should warrant some additional investigation, or if, as I tell clients all the time, just run. Don't walk, don't crawl, run, run, run. Okay. But on the same side is, depending upon what the property is, maybe we can do a land development on it. Now that would be taking maybe a property that's like a brownfields property. It was some sort of older industrial use in Reading. Alan Schumann is awesome at doing this. He takes these older buildings, totally rehabs them into a lot of apartments, and you get the apartments upstairs, you get the commercial down on the first floor. I'm not talking about something on that scale. Not that you can't do it on that scale, but I'm talking about something whereby you're going to take maybe a single family and convert it into, a 2-unit, a 3-unit. Maybe it is an older commercial facility where you're going to change it from commercial to a residential. And we're going to go through the land development plan process to do that. Same thing there. Give me an address, give me a couple hours. I'll call you back and give you an idea as to whether or not I think that is a possibility. A lot of times when we're talking about the conversion from one use to another, the things that come into play range more with along the lines of, say, parking. Especially in the city, that a lot. If you follow, and you probably do, that you follow the city's zoning hearing board, one of the big issues that the city zoning hearing board constantly has is parking. So if we're going to convert something from one use to another use, are we going to be able to accommodate the parking for it? The other then, if it's not already connected to public sewer, or, what are we going to do with the sewage? Because obviously we're going to generate sewage of X versus on a single residential use versus Y with a multi-residential use. And we need to look at those kind of things. If we can accommodate the parking, can we accommodate the stormwater management that has to go along with that parking under today's rules and regulations? It's not just a matter of going in and macadaming enough area. It's what are we going to do with the water now coming off of that area as well? Those are the types of things that we look at. But when somebody's looking to buy a parcel, again, to potentially flip, maybe long-term hold, but again, there may be some inherent value in looking to see, can I change the use of that and increase its uses. We can also look at going from some sort of maybe older industrial into some sort of commercial, where maybe it's a vacant piece of ground somewhere. We look at, can we put some sort of little strip mall on or something like that. So those are all the things that, given an address in a couple hours, we routinely can generate back an email outlining our thoughts on whether or not it's feasible enough, and what would be the next steps to take that feasibility to the next level. Parking's huge, but I will tell you that oftentimes parking is not so much an issue once you get outside the city. I mean, it's a bear inside the city, obviously, but once you get outside the city, it's typically not that big of a deal. I had one 2 weeks ago I looked at for a client up in Slatington, who there was this, it was a big old mansion kind of thing, wanted to turn it into a bunch of units, but there was no place to park. There was no way we gave parking in there, and there was no way they're going to let him do it because of that. The property right next door did it, but that was a bigger property. I think this was only like 1/3 of an acre, and the property next door was like all but an acre, and they had plenty of room for their parking. He had nothing. I said, just run away. It's worth it. You got to sell it just as a house. And at that point, it's a white elephant, because it's this massive house that needs lots of work in the middle of nowhere. Who the heck wants that? So I think it was an old general store or something at one time. It was over 100 years old, the building, so it needed a lot of work. But parking is an issue, absolutely. But again, you got to think outside the box. Too many people, they just look at what's in front of them and that's it. They're not thinking outside the box. How can I generate additional income from this property? Again, one thing you have to realize is that it takes time to get through that process. So if you're doing it as a flip, and you're typically, you want to flip in 3 to 4 months, this is something that may have to be a more long-term flip until you can get through that land development plan process if you're going to do multi-units, or to subdivide that piece off before you can go actually sell it. kind of thing. The other thing, next thing I wanted to talk about was sewage disposal, because that comes into play, and it doesn't come into play necessarily so much when you're like in the city and in some of your boroughs that you may deal in. But if you're out from that, and you're in a little bit more of a rural setting, I think that you have to make sure you have a good understanding of sewage disposal both ways. You're buying, especially if you're going to buy for flip or buy for hold, to make sure that you're not going to run afoul of any kind of sewage issues. And then also, we do a lot of work where we're connecting properties to public sewer, which are close. And I'm going to define close as being within a quarter mile. If we can, if we have a sewer line within basically 1,300 feet of the subject property, we can probably get it connected pretty close to the same dollars that it would cost to fix it on site. And again, my opinion is that a property that is connected to public sewer will sell at a premium to one that is not, if they're identical in every other aspect. And so if a property to fix it on site is going to cost $35,000, and that's typically our working number today in 2021, all in between the design, permitting, testing, installation, my working number is $35,000. So if I can connect it to public sewer for say $38,000, $40,000, which is out at like 1,300 feet, then I think that's the thing to do. You can certainly justify that in the premium that you're going to get on the backside. If it's a shorter distance, we're working on one today just outside of Reading, that is only 156 feet away, and so that's like a no-brainer. It has an on-site septic system. It's failed for the sale of real estate through an inspection last week. Realtors reached out to us this morning, said we need to know how to connect this to public sewer and what the price is going to be. And what we will do is we will generate a cost proposal not only for ourselves to do the design and engineering, but we also will get all the relevant fees from the underlying municipality or municipal authority, depending on who the ownership of the pipes are. And then also get from a contractor that we know and work with, under no obligation to use that contractor whatsoever, but we will get a budget number from them and we'll provide to you, typically we can do it within 3 days, a full written estimate on what it's going to cost to go from point A to point B, literally. Obviously, that's the maximum you're going to pay, because if we can find a contractor to do it for less, well, then it's going to come down. Our numbers are pretty fixed number. The municipality's numbers are fixed number. But if you can make the deal work with that number that we give you as a budget number, then you're golden, because it can only come down. It's not going to go up. Typically, it won't go up. I mean, there are some things like unforeseen things like rock or something, but that's going to affect everybody, not just our guy. But we sort of know where all the rock's at and things like that. Take that into consideration. But on the buying side, if you find a property that has a failed septic system on it, and you can beat the seller up on it because it has that failed on-site septic system, because you know that the public sewer line's less than 1,300 feet away, and you call us at All County, and we generate for you really quick a cost estimate to connect that to public sewer. In our minds, information is key to life. It allows you then to negotiate from the point of intelligence and over somebody else that doesn't have that information. But that's where you can make some money, because there are a lot of properties sitting out there that people think that they're basically unsaleable because they're not thinking outside the box, or the realtors aren't thinking outside the box as to how to solve this problem. So, but be cognizant of the on-site sewage disposal systems going in the door too. If you're buying it to flip it, make sure you're checking it. Don't buy it as is, where is, how is. Always reserve your right to do that inspection and make sure it's okay, because otherwise, you could blow your pro forma up really fast on what you think you're going to sink into it. I tell clients all the time, you can put a lot of roofs on a house for $35,000. The next thing I want to touch base on was the other permitting that may come into play. So if you buy a property, and whether it be, hold or flip again, and you want to take and add something onto it, it's a 3-bedroom house, you want to make it a 4-bedroom house, it's a whatever it is, you want to put an addition on it, you definitely are going to need to have a soil and erosion control plan. Depending upon the area disturbed, you may not need to have that plan reviewed by anybody, but the law says that you have to have a plan from word go, but under 5,000 square feet of earth disturbance, you don't need to have a permit. From 5,000 square feet up to 1 acre of earth disturbance, which is 43,560 square feet, you can just have a soil and erosion control plan with a permit. Once you crack 1 acre of earth disturbance, you then have to have what's called a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit, NPDES. So regardless of what you're going to do, you're going to have some sort of soil and erosion control measures in place. Whether or not you have to have a permit for it is going to depending upon what the actual earth disturbance is. The same thing is true of impervious surface. So if you're going to take and build additional impervious surface, that would be more driveway, addition to the house, maybe it's some sort of detached or attached garage onto a property, could be just more sidewalk or patio. Typically decks are not going to count because they're not impervious. But if you have an impervious surface, swimming pool is an impervious surface. If a drop of rain falls out of the sky and it goes into the swimming pool, it's not going back into the ground. If you're going to do anything with impervious surfaces, you may then need to have a stormwater management permit. Each municipality has a different threshold that you have to meet until you need to have the stormwater management permit. In your more urbanized areas, it's typically about 1,000 square feet. There's some that are a little under that, and there's some that are a little over that, but typically it's about 1,000 square feet. Again, we typically know what they are, so if you call us with an address and say, I want to do this, what do I need from the standpoint of permitting? We can get back to you pretty quick as to what level of permitting you might need. And if it's a project of any consequence, real consequence, we're probably going to ask to meet you on site so that we can understand that your goals and objectives, so we can make sure we're going to get you from point A to point B and keep you out of trouble. And because it's no fun getting you out of trouble once you're in trouble, we want to keep you out of trouble from the word go, and we do that at no cost. And especially with investor kind of people, I had a conversation actually this morning with a realtor with an investor and said, listen, I will go look at 10 properties with you for free. I will tell you to run away from 9 of them. And we hit that 10th one that I like, you like, go buy it, let's do it. But I want to keep you out of trouble on the other 9. You want to go buy the other 9, you want to get into trouble, I'll be happy to get you out of trouble. But that's just going to cost money, needless money, and it's just no fun. So, but we are going to ask to meet you on site to look at the project to make sure we understand all the goals and objectives. And we may stand there on site and say, you can't do that. We've told many a client, you can't do that. And we'll explain why you can't do that. And then just, either change the goals and objectives and or just don't buy it, kind of thing. But the other thing that you may need is what's called a grading plan. That's going to show how the impervious surfaces that you're going to construct, where's the water going to go when they run off of them. So even if we don't need to have a stormwater management plan, we still have to have a grading plan to show where that water is going to go. We can't put water onto somebody else's property at a rate greater than it's going to that other person's property today. And we can't put it onto the other person's property at a place it's not going on the other person's property today. So for instance, if I'm going to build a garage and I'm going to put downspouts on that garage, and the downspouts are now going to concentrate water because they're in the rain gutter, then they're in the downspout, then they come out and they're in a pipe. So now I have concentrated water. I can't put that concentrated water and make it discharge onto my neighbor's property because it has not gone on the neighbor's property at that rate, because when it comes out of a pipe, it's at a greater velocity than it was when it was just running across the yard on somebody else's property. So I have to show how I'm going to manage that through grading and potentially stormwater management, so that I don't impact my neighbor. Okay. So there are types of things that we need to be cognizant of if you're going to do some sort of, whether or not it's outright complete new construction, or you're going to be doing some sort of addition that's going to change the exterior of a building. And the other one would be, let me touch base on it real quick, is demolition. If you're going to take and demolish something and rebuild it, whether it be in the same spot or another, you want to make sure you talk to us first, because we want to get credit potentially for the impervious surfaces that are there now. If there's a house on a property and that house has 1,000 square feet sitting in the earth, I don't care if it could be a 3-story house and there's 3,000 square foot inside of it, but sitting on the earth, there's 1,000 square feet. You're going to demolish that and build a new house. And let's say that the new house is 1,500 square foot sitting on the face of the earth. I want to get credit for the 1,000 square feet of impervious surface there now, so that now I'm only increasing the impervious surface by 500 square feet. A lot of municipalities will let us get credit for that. There's some that say you tear it down, now you're starting fresh. But we want to make sure that we document what's there before it's removed, so that we can try and get as much credit for it as possible.
Good. Have you seen, when you say that there are times when you tell investors, no, you can't do that, that's something that can be done? Have you seen any common mistakes or repeated things that come up that some investors want to do and they really shouldn't do?
I would tell you that from the standpoint of investors, not really. Okay. Investors are pretty savvy, obviously, because they're investors. I think it's the young, not young in age, but young in just experience investors that are more apt to get themselves in trouble, because the younger investor is they're no different than a typical buyer. And we get so many buyers who have a tendency to want to talk themselves into something. Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's not that bad. I can do this, this, and this, and it'll be okay. Well, and then in the end, it's not okay, because we told them it wasn't going to be okay. So, and I think that the key for investors, especially the young investors, again, not age, but in experience, mm-hmm. is that they really need to partake in, for instance, these kind of discussions, so that they can gain the experience from those that have been doing it for a long time, and that they don't become that buyer who talks themselves into something. And so your typical investor, no, I don't find an investor is talking themselves into something. They're doing their due diligence. They understand mm-hmm. that there's certain red flags, that when they hit that red flag, it's a hard stop. They stop, they go to the next one, stop wasting their time, because time is money, especially in today's reality, because so many things get sold so quickly.
That's good. If people have any questions, comment them on the Berks County Contractors Connections group.
Right.
And we just keep the conversation going like that. I like that you hit several points talking about subdivision, floodplains, land development, and sewage disposal.
Right.
That was good.
And again, we tell people all day long, we'll answer questions over the phone all day long without issue. So just call us. If we can answer the question, we will. If we need to do a little bit more digging, mm-hmm. we will potentially do that without issue, but just call us before you get into trouble.
So what would that look like? How can people really get in contact with you? You have a website, a phone number you want to share?
So the website is all-county-assoc.com, short for associates. Mm-hmm. And the phone number is 610-469-3830. Actually have an 800 number that we've had for 30 years. Nobody needs an 800 number anymore because it's all toll free, so as it is. But if it's just, again, 610-469-3830, call, ask your question. It'll get routed to the right one of us in the company, and we will get right back to you.